Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm your hostess, Snappy, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Dion. And today we have a special guest in the house, Ammon from Lady Babylon, and we're soon to be joined by our good friend, Neal. He's just running a few minutes behind. But today is a really fun episode. This is our 33rd episode that we've done together, Dion and I, and we wanted to do something special. We know that this particular number is a very occulted number. It's connected to eclipses, and it's also connected to Jesus. And a lot of this mythology that Ammon talks about, that Neal talks about, and that we talk about here. And recently we were doing our deep dive into the eclipse, and that really kind of sparked your creativity, Dion? And you really wanted to dig down this thing. So to start with, you've kind of given us a presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And yeah, you can begin.
Well, first, we got to give a trigger warning in case we talk about piracy. Oi, mateys, get ready because the seas might get rough on this one. Trigger warning, like I said. So
yeah, this is going to get very violent and very sexual. You know,
yeah.
This is not to be laughed at. That warning.
and since you guys are expecting some numerology or gematria, number 33 stuff. I'm not too much into that, but I do know in this mythology that 33 AD, at the 33rd parallel, at the age of 33 years old, Emmanuel, the Christ, was crucified at a solar eclipse. There's some 33s for you and a set of threes. And I want to talk about the night before. You know, what happened the day before? Oh, the Last Supper. You know, and you know, before that, so they have a Last Supper. Now, you talked about the Last Supper, other people, and in different videos. Now, this is called a triclinium. And that's a Roman term for, it's like a U shaped with beds, and they recline when they eat. You can see the people are laying down. And that was the normal way to do it. And so your Last Supper would look something like that, with people reclining, with some sheepkins, little pirates. And up in the left-hand corner, you could see is from a tomb. And those were called the agape love tables. And they would put mattresses on that. And these are in the catacombs.
And we've talked about this with Ammon before. You were telling us that you have text about the Christians hotboxing these catacombs and having orgies with these feasts.
Yeah, down there in these little things. Go for it. What were you going to say, Ammon?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, yeah, with getting in trouble with the Roman authorities, that's what I like to find, you know, and you got to remember that one of the big clashes that they've got right off the bat is the incest, right? The incest is intolerable. So in these agape feasts, they start to break them up, and the Roman authorities do it. And the charges are they're taking kids off the street and they're putting them through sexual practices, initiations. The Christians are doing this, right? It's not as if it's some Christians today, like, oh, it's, you know, a rogue priest, but this is the practice, right? The initiation involves sexual exposure. So that's where you see them legally getting into problems with the Romans, because they're doing it between mothers and sons, and that's no good for the Romans. And if you just want to believe the Bible instead of, you know, any other source, Paul is writing about this as a problem, right? So Jude is writing about it. We've got to get these sexual practices cleaned up, right? So yeah.
The Last Supper.
Wow.
So they're at the Last Supper, and it's pretty naughty, where they take different Eucharists. We know that they have wafers they take, which people could say they're suppositories. We know that there's alabastrums, which are medicated dildos. We know there's talk of snake venoms. There could have been several things in these cups. You have to take a cup at this feast, you know.
Also, all the accusations of the drinking of corpse liqueur. So this is a thing that you see in the Roman texts where they're actually barring. You can still see some of these tombs that are barred to this day to prevent people from drinking the corpse liquor and getting the drugs from these bodies after they had decayed. So, hey, Neal, how's it
sorry about
going?
that. Good. You good?
No
Good. How
worries.
you guys doing?
Welcome to the stream. Just to catch you up, Dion is giving us kind of his brief presentation on his idea of Jesus as this pirate figure. And then we're going to kind of riff on it from there. And just to start, we're opening up with the Last Supper, and we're discussing the agape love feasts, which you know all about.
Yeah.
And you look at the Last Supper, you got to have a bed for the Last Supper. That's part of the condition. You know, that's a big part of it, the triclinium, where you would lay down and feast. So let's hit the next pick. That's the Garden of Gethsemane.
I've been there.
Oh, yeah. And just to show you, it's an olive grove. Exactly what it is, an olive grove, because that's sacred, and that's part of the ritual. It's part of the anointing with olives. There's a ritual bath there. You have a figure in the corner, which is supposed to be John with a cup of snakes, and you'll find that in a lot of art. And so this is the moments leading up to the crucifixion the day before.
You see that building in the background? That's those bricks.
Yeah.
That's a church. That's an Orthodox church. It's been there for a while. I'm not sure when they built it, but it's pretty old. But when you go inside, you can see they have big paintings of the scenes of the night he got arrested. And in one of the paintings, there is a little boy with a little piece of clothing on running away.
Oh, glad you said that, because you told that part of the story for me, so I didn't have to tell that part.
I actually had that in my camera when I went to Israel. It's in my collection of images.
That's amazing.
Yep. And so it's because of that he gets arrested, and then we have a crucifixion that takes place, like I said, 33 AD at the 33rd parallel. Somebody was 33 years old in the Saturnian rite involving snakes, snake venom, and little kids. And there was, like I said, an eclipse, and something went wrong, you know. And some people talk about this in terms of piracy, the lestes, that the disciples were young boys, and that there was themes of them going around snatching boys, and not for the church, but to sell them into slavery or to use in sexual rituals. And so I was wondering, is there any context behind that in ancient times, in ancient Rome? You know,
or Greece. Like, I wanted to ask you specifically, Ammon, is Odysseus a pirate?
He's not technically a lestes, no. If anything, he's getting trafficked by some pirates like Circe and Calypso. Did anybody notice that he's held prisoner for most of the 10 years that he's, doing his journey? Yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to say about that, to answer, to say, how do we get into the meat? I think the entry level is the age of the apostles, the entry level. Those are his mathetai. Those are his students, his pupils. Their age would have been anywhere from 10 to 12 to late teens, right? These are kids, and these are kids that he is separating from their houses and their families. They themselves admit to it. Peter says, we left everything behind, right? Peter's not married. Don't let anybody tell you Peter is married. The evidence they use for that is the fact that he's got an in-law.
Yeah, that makes him seem like he's a child. He's young and he's living with his family.
But the word that's used, the word that's used for in-law is sister-in-law as well as mother-in-law. So there's no proof that Peter ever, because she's never mentioned anywhere that she's got a wife. Peter is one of the teenagers, just like, with the youngest being John, probably, who's like 10 to 12, right? Who, when he sits on Jesus's lap, comes up to the middle of his chest, So the picture of Jesus with adult male apostles is absolutely ludicrous, and it does not fit with the picture that comes out of his own mouth. When Jesus is about to be arrested, right? The authorities are coming up and they've brought the big force. They go to take him and he screams, "I'm not a lestes," right? He's denying from the very arrest. He's denying that he's one of these things. And what is that lestes? That lestes, very appropriately for the Bible, is working with children in prostitution via drug using initiatory cults. This is not just a business. It's not just a criminal enterprise.
You know what I know?
There are criminal enterprises that are, that's okay. There are criminal enterprises that are centered around the operation of a mystery. And that mystery initiation involves the little kid getting drugged and you becoming a follower through their initiation. So it's, yeah, take it for what it is.
Have you guys watched my last video about Dionysus? I showed I translated the Homeric hymn to Bacchus, and I used that as my intro. Well, in that text, they use the term lestes for pirates. And sure enough, this was mind-blowing when I saw this. Dionysus is depicted as a young boy in adolescence. Why are they trying to abduct him if he's just a young boy in adolescence? But get this, even at the end of when the story's over, Dionysus spares one person, and it's one of their slaves who was a young boy. So these lestes are keeping kids, and this must have been a known thing in the Greek world that they were doing this.
Oh, yeah.
100%. I was reading some of Caesar's writing on pirates. And one thing that stood out to me is that when he's describing some of these pirates, a lot of them are the children that are being trafficked, right? It's like a child soldier type scenario where they're taking these kids, indoctrinating them, and then sending them out to go get other kids.
You got to think about how much value a young boy would have in the ancient world. You can groom them into whatever you want, make them into a soldier, make them into whatever. It's like that's a lot of value for a pirate to come across. We
got some numbers for you. 1 out of 3 in the Roman Empire was a slave. 1 out of 5 in the Roman provinces was a slave. Wow. And you needed these slaves. So go to the next pic, Snappy. And I want to break down a little bit of the Roman slavery in the Roman Empire. Oh, well, there you go. There's Jesus on an anchor. And part of it, I want to get into, you talked about Caesar. In 75 BC, Caesar was kidnapped by Sicilian, it's a weird word to say, Turkish pirates from Tarsus, where Paul was born. And they kidnapped him. And part of the thing was he was held hostage for a ransom. And he even he got mad at them and said, "You're charging too little for me. You got to charge more than that." You know, it's famous in the story. So his people go get the money, come back, and he crucifies them. And he had warned them, "I'm going to crucify you." And he played their pirate games with them. You know, and the piracy in that time was big. You had the Mithridatic Wars with Mithridates. If you know about the person who would take the snake venom.
Poison King.
Yeah, Poison King, the Eupator. Well, he worked with those pirates, and he sacked at Delos. Let's hit the next pic. I want to break this down real quick, because this is your guys' wheelhouse. So we got Apollo and Artemis born on Delos. The island's special there. You know, at a certain point, they purged all the dead bodies off the island, purified it. No one's allowed to give birth there or have a death there. You would have to go to Rhodes or to another island. And this became the biggest slave port in the world, with up to 10,000 slaves a day coming through this port, tax-free, asylum as well, with a Jewish edict, because they have a special synagogue there where it's not Yahweh, but El Elyon is the inscription. And as well, they had temples to Baal, Anubis, the Heracles Cave.
El Elyon is a translation of Theopsistos.
Yeah, that's what's on the wall, that right there. And there's synagogue there. And so this is one of the places they were coming to. So what I did was I looked at all the pirate slave ports in the Mediterranean, and some of the main ones were Alexandria, Tyre, Tarsus, Philippi, Rhodes. And you type that in the AI, and the word that comes out is Paul. Those are all the places that Paul goes to. Paul the pirate, Saul, Paulus. And so let's hit the next pic. One of the versions they had there was Apollo, Mithra, Helios, and Aglamation. And later on, the pirates in the Roman army adopted Mithra, and the pirates were into Mithra big time. Here's some symbols right there of Helios. You might see the swastika there, and Apollo the sun, you know, and that island was so special. Delos, the slave island, but it eventually got sacked and taken out by Mithridates, took it out to get even with Rome, because he knew that was the heart of their empire was the slave trade. And a lot of the slaves were coming from Judea, all over, you know. Hit the next pick. Boom. And one last myth on Delos is the birth of Leto, how Leto gives birth to Apollo and Artemis under a palm tree, which is the same thing with the Virgin Mary in the palm tree and in the Quran with the palm tree, as well as Buddha being born underneath the sal tree and them having to touch the tree. And so this Mithridatic pirate Saturnian stuff, and you know, Mithra's father is Saturn. And so just saying, there's some pirate mythology and Mithra stuff going on, this connection with this ancient stuff. So hit the next pick. Boom. So Paul would go around to all these ports, these little slave ports. This is Acts 20:10. When the kid fell out the window, what does Paul have to do? Paul has to go down and get on top of him, the little boy. You can go to the next pick. Here's a representation of it that you'll see in art, in the turn of century art. Yep, that's him healing the young boy. Go to the next one. I'm going quick for you guys. Elisha, the prophet Elisha. He has to get down to the little boy, put his mouth on the child's mouth, lays on the little boy to heal him. You know, so I'm showing there's a precedence of pirates, slavery, messing around with little boys, and also Paul, born at Tarsus, where the capital of the Cilician pirates, was also a tax-free port and had asylum because of the money it generated through the slaves. And that's where Paul we're talking about. So let's hit the next pick.
Also, real quick, I think that's a drug reference there. He sneezes 7 times.
Mm-hmm.
You sneeze when someone puts something in your nose.
Oh.
So I think there's a lot of that going on in the Bible where they'll make it look like it's a miracle, but they'll leave a little hint and say, well, this is actually a drug reference. It's some sort of antidote.
Insufflation, they call it, Neal. Insufflation. It's one administration route for drugs in antiquity. You can fumigate somebody in an enclosed room, right, with just burning substances. You can put something into their rectum and get it right into their system that way. They do that. But another way they have is blowing directly up the nostril. So they have these little insufflation tubes, and you just blow it in whatever plant it is mixed with whatever you want. And it ends up, it's a drug route administration. I want to know, furthermore, with Paul, to support your findings, Dion, is why is it that he's immune to viper venom? Because the locals, when he shows up, and he's bit by a snake and the snake's hanging off of him, and it's a little one, just like the little ones that Jesus goes to in the Daemon, right? Remember when the angels appear to Jesus when he's in the void, and he's there with the Asterion, he's there with the little snakes, the ones that they have that Paul gets bitten by, and he's immune. It's a miracle, praise Jesus. He's not dead. All the locals were like, oh, that guy must have been a murderer, because he's going to die now. He's not going to get 10 steps. He's going to die. They knew which one it was, the bit of, and he just brushes it off, and it's no problem. There's a reason that Jesus told those apostles, remember, they're kids. There's a reason he told them, you can raise up serpents, and if you drink the deadly drugs, they won't hurt you. That's direct out of Mark. It's central to Christianity. If you are a Christian today, let me challenge you. If you are a Christian today and you are not involved in using venoms and in the rape of children, you are not a true Christian.
So only Pentecostal snake handlers are true Christians. At this point.
You know who the true Christians were? So Valentinus. And you can trace this back. You can check out the evidence. There's a lot of different sources that say Valentinus, his student was Marcus Magus. But anyways, Valentinus was a student of Theudas. That's the girl that traveled around the world with Paul. He's literally 2 students away from Paul, okay? So what was Valentinus? Why was he so popular? Why was he was second amount of votes for the high bishop of the whole Roman Empire. Second. He lost to Saint Acatus or whatever his name is, the 3rd pope on the list or whatever. Anyways, this guy was doing Eucharist, putting drugs in the Eucharist. and doing with drinking purple shit. It's in the sources. So like you're 2 away from Paul and you're still doing that shit. That's what real Christians were doing.
Yeah,
And you said
Valentini was
purple.
pretty Gnostic.
Well, you said
Now
purple.
they
That's
call them
important.
Gnostic, right?
The purple is important because the purple was also part of the trade. It wasn't just boys; it was purple as well. That was a signifier you could see. I mean, even the Phoenicians were famous for kidnapping. You know, if you left your kids down by the sea and the Phoenician boat was around, you might just see it sailing away. You know.
That was one thing I noticed too, Ammon. I wanted to ask you about is I keep seeing these themes of these pirate wars between the Romans and the Carthaginians. They're both doing the piracy, but they're accusing the other of doing it worse. You know, and they're both worshiping Saturn. They're both doing these blood sacrifices. What's going on there?
Yeah, notice the sea power, how important it is in Mediterranean history. I mean, all of the oldest cultures, I'm not talking about anything in the Levant. That stuff's brand new. I'm talking about the old Chalcolithic stuff. Notice they're all seafaring cultures. The technology that really bursts through is the seafaring, the capacity to trade goods and the capacity to colonize. And this is a Bronze Age thing. They're breaking through. The fact that we have the oldest reference to an epic is the Argonautica. It's supposed to be the voyage of the first ship, right? Now, whether it was or not, let them dig it up at the bottom of the Black Sea, right? They'll find stuff. But this first ship, what does this first ship do? Just ask yourself this one question. And we're out of myth now. We're in history. What does this first sailing vessel do? It sails to Colchis and abducts a teenage girl.
There you go. There's another example of late. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
Jason is definitely a pirate. If Odysseus isn't, but Jason surely is.
That's what sparks off the Trojan War was pirates stealing young women. 2 of them couldn't trade back into they first it was Medea, and then they went and in retaliation they went and captured Helen, and then the war started. That's how the war starts. Two bad moves happen, and then all of a sudden it's a war.
And they also got Europa. Don't forget Europa. That's what got Cadmus involved and all that kind of stuff, right?
All right, Thebes, yeah.
Again, the Phoenicians. Remember, they're developing the use of the purple, and the purple, as Dion said, is hand in hand with the rite, with the child transforming, or as you and I would say, the child rape ritual. Yeah. You
know. So you wonder where did they get the boats from? Where could Jesus get these boats? In some of the mythologies, they'll say his father is a shipbuilder, a carpenter. He works with wood. He's building ships. Well, Mary Salome had a fleet of boats, it says in the Bible. She had more than one, it says. She was a woman of means. A lot of them were women of means. Even when Paul goes to Philippi with Lydia, you know, that's the purple trade. That's pirate. That's a pirate port.
Wait, is a Tecton just a wood builder, or is that something else?
I've seen it. I've seen it, Neal, and I think it's not just a woodworker, but it's also a woodworker in ships.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Makes sense.
That's amazing.
And so Mary Salome had boats. Hit the next picture.
And it's important, like we point out, Mary Salome is the mother of the Sons of Thunder, which is John the Beloved and his twin brother James.
Yeah. So there's stories of Jesus doing the ministry on the boat, pulling up on the boat, and you see some naked boys right there in the picture. That's the crew right there. You know, and tell me this. Why, after he's crucified, the disciples go back out fishing and they're naked on a boat, and he has to put on his clothes to jump into the water? Yeah. You know, they just crucified your Messiah, but you want to go get naked and go fishing.
By the way, I just want to point this out. I don't know when this was painted by what.
This is the new school stuff. I like the Jehovah.
Right. But I'm saying if they know anything about the ancient world, they would know that a clean shaven face represents a young boy. So that could be intentional.
Yeah, they're naked.
Yeah.
he's clothed and because those colors represent that red.
You're
could
not
be
shaving.
Hermes.
There's no shaving back then. You had to be like super rich to get a good razor. Yeah.
Yeah, when Alexander the prophet, the false prophet, and remember, he's a real historical guy that we have statues of and representations on coins. He was super, super popular in the same area on the south side of the Black Sea. He was doing the Jesus thing. And in doing the Jesus thing, he came through it himself as a boy, and describes when he was just that kid on the edge of ripening, when he couldn't, he only had peach fuzz on his chin. That's when he was being sold. Now he took it upon himself, right? And he made the transactions himself, but he grows up to be a Laestes, and we're told now this is within 100 years ish of Jesus himself living and doing his thing. We have another guy who's saying, this is what a Laestes is, and this is historically what they're like and what they do. And if you notice, that Laestes, Alexander, is doing exactly everything that Jesus does. Exactly. But he has so much power that he's able to have other provinces send him their best looking boys, their best looking kids. And he makes it a rule as a Laestes never to kiss any kid that's over 18. And it's just coincidence that they chose 18, right? Because they didn't have legal age of consent. So,
can we hit the next pick? Oh, there's that purple right there. That's important because it's like a drug. It's like putting two drugs together. You're compounding with a young boy or young girl, and these drugs put together, you're having chemical reactions that are fused in magic rituals.
That's where the purple comes from, those snails, right?
Yeah.
And we see this being practiced throughout the ancient Bronze Age, right? In Phoenicia as well as in Mycenae, in Crete. So it's ancient stuff.
Yeah, it's from what I know. Minoans are the ones who discovered it. The Phoenicians are the ones that trade it. It's always
exactly like wine. It's similar to how we see the process of wine, like you were talking about.
They get credit for all this shit because they're the traders, like the alphabet. Like who knows? The alphabet could have been. If you look at if you look at that Phoenician alphabet, there's a lot of the same symbols that you see in Linear B. So like, what's going on there? Did they just invent this office, or did they use it based off Linear B? I don't know. I'm just saying.
Well, the Phoenicians. Don't forget the word phonikos in Greek just means purple.
Purple.
Right. Yeah, they're the purple people, the purple traders. That was
but
what
you know
they
what?
Even
in their tongue, Kanani means purple too. So they kind of call, unless they call, this is how it works. They don't call themselves that. They are okay with being called that, but they would refer to themselves as Sidonians or Tyrians, whatever city they're from.
Right.
Which are slave ports. Those are pirate slave ports.
Yeah.
Hit the next pick. Oh, if you could say that word for me. My French is not so good.
The matelotage.
Matelotage. That was an agreement amongst pairs of European settlers.
Matelotage? Yeah.
Yeah. And you'd be mates. That's where you get the word mate. Ahoy, mate. And you would agree to share your incomes and inherit your partner's property. You would fight for each other. And there were homosexual unions that was promoted amongst the pirates and amongst the ships. This is the formalized version later on. It as a term in France, as a legal term, because you could go to court and fight and say, well, my partner died and I get half of the doubloons or whatever.
But this is also a trope we see across history, especially once you get into the Catholic era where homosexuality is extraordinarily persecuted. A lot of people run off to become pirates in order to pursue their love,
because on the international seas is a different form of law.
Yeah.
And you have something that's maritime sea law. And that was law that came together for all ships to trade and come together. You had to have a uniform.
Yeah, because you're not going to court. You're not going to a courtroom to decide on issues. You decide in the sea. You got to decide there. So it's a different. It's a free world.
Yeah, no.
I almost get jealous when I think about it. Like, I wish this was the world we had right now. I'm just kidding.
Well, no, but it's this interesting thing when you study the pirates across history. You see that they're the best of us and the worst of us, right?
Yeah.
You know, in the Caribbean, they're starting these free democratic societies that have constitutions. You
Right.
know, at the same time that they're running around trafficking people.
But you know what they were doing? They're looking back at the last seafaring civilization, which was the Greeks. How did the Greeks figure this shit out? They had all these islands everywhere. How did they keep it together? Oh, constitutional republics, democracy, Senate. Oh, okay. That's what let's try that for. It hasn't been tried in 2,000 years. Let's do it. And then they brought it back. That's what they were doing. You know.
What if I can change direction a little bit? What is the but I totally agree. What I would just call it Neal civilization, right? That's how they looked at it. The Greeks at the time and the Romans. That was the civilization. And the dark forces of Christianity tore that down. Tore down that civilization. We didn't get democracy back until good old, Tom J and all those guys finally said, "Hey, let's bring this old thing back." What do you do though with that Thracian pirate, guys? What do you do with the Thracian pirate who puts the boy to sleep with his drugs and then cuts off his testicles and turns him into his Dionysus? It's a tradition. What is that all about? What is that? Is it just straight up pedophilia, or is it some kind of maturation rite? What is the significance of this castration stuff?
So this is something that's personal to me as a trans person, and I've gone deep looking into these kinds of castration rites across history. And I think what we're seeing is a later tradition based off of a much earlier Bronze Age feminine rite that would be done between mother and child. And it would be a child at a young age who would have presented themselves as trans and then went through that initiation, and this is where you get your Ada story, but it's also important, like people like Julian talk about it, is that it's a literal ritual that happens for some, but it's also a philosophical, mental thing that happens for others within the rites of Dionysus. They talk about this. In order to experience the all, you have to become the feminine. This is where you get that dominant figure of like Tiresias, who lives as a woman and also is a bird at a time, so it's like, it's all about rehealing that kind of wound, returning back to that Phanes character, before the separation,
He did that gender switching, Snappy. He did it through the serpent, right? That's how they're doing all the gender switching. So there's this thing about gender switching and kind of, they almost look at it as education. They use the same terms that you would use for education. So it's like it's almost like that pirate or that lay stace, that trafficker is involved in a system that ultimately takes a boy that's abandoned and gives that boy a female perspective and an education. And it's no wonder that Philip, the apostle of Jesus Christ, was walking around with young girls who had transitioned, who he had transformed in the Acts of Philip, it says, into boys.
Well, this is what I think. Okay, I think that we have all of these drugs, a lot of this psychedelia, all of it is coming out of these feminine rites, and it begins as a way to deal with period issues, hormonal issues, and pregnancy, which is killing most women at this time, and so all of these rites are coming out of this out of this kind of good reasoning. But what happens is, what happens if you develop a drug that can transition someone into a female in a literal sense? Of course, abusive, horrific, especially at this time where there are no overarching laws. Of course, abusive people are going to take advantage of this to traffic people. Sure. It's a natural outpouring. It's like it's disgusting and shocking, but it doesn't mean the drugs and the rites as they originally were practiced were wrong or evil. Because I think they're coming out of this reality that trans people exist and trans people are suffering. And that these women who are looking at their trans children are not going to abandon them. They're going to try to help them, you know, live that life. And we see this time and time again with a lot of these shamanistic cultures where trans people, non-binary people, or bigendered people are usually the priestly caste people, you know? And this is true of a lot of pre-modern civilizations across the world, right?
And that's why they have the gynomorph. The Greeks worship the form that is masculine transition to feminine. And they worship that form. And then what would be the polar opposite, I guess, hormonally, biologically, is the woman who has the full penis. And the original statues of Aphrodite, and this is hilarious because professors look at these and scratch their head. Oh, let's not talk about those, right? The oldest statues of Aphrodite, they have a large erect penis. And you know, people look at them and guess what? They're talking about transitioning in antiquity. But it's within a religious context, so that somebody who is transitioning, they enter into it voluntarily. And they go through a process that starts with their emasculation for boys, and then a drug regimen that transforms them into this Dionysiac, revered and worshipped individual, right? And then they have the class, they have the gynomorph, and then they have the class of the divine incarnation. What is the divine incarnation? It's both. It's hermaphroditic, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Hermaphrodites were worshipped, and in antiquity, with both the Greeks and the Romans, the birth of a hermaphrodite would be interpreted as some kind of hugely significant sign of the ages. Something was going to happen.
You see this so much in a lot of the Orphic texts. Like, I just keep thinking about Lucifer or Apollo and Artemis, right? One is the masculine female, one is the feminine male, and they're mirrors of each other, right? There's that taboo love of incest that we see. Also, there's like, you know, and then they relate back to the Faunis in a lot of these witchcraft traditions. Like in Aradia, they talk about how Diana is ripped into two, and she becomes both Artemis and Lucifer or Apollo, you know? So there's all of this weird kind of gender play. And I think a lot of it has to do with this mystery of experiencing of the all and this deep understanding. And we also see, like, it's important, the Greeks don't talk about it as much in their texts, but we do see the reverse side when they look at the Scythians. We see Scythian women going through a transition. They're transforming themselves into these giant warriors, and they're even wearing beards. Like, we had that one warrior who was dug up. It was a 17 or 18-year-old girl who's over 6 feet tall and wearing a fake beard and buried like a king. You know, so
the Egyptian queens did the same too.
They did? What was going on in Egypt?
I think it's either Nefertiti or Nefertari. One of those two was presenting herself as a man when she came out to visit the public. She had a beard, she had a fake beard, and dressed in men's garb, and they treated her as a regular pharaoh, like any other male pharaoh.
So, if you'd like to know a little more about that, some of the beards were goat beards that they would attach because of the goat collecting the mastic, the incense, the sacred incense. And you got the flail that the pharaohs hold, the crook and the flail.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did an episode on how the goats and the goats would collect in the fields through that plant.
Makes sense.
And then they would cut off that and they would attach it. And it's like a sacred beard of incense. And so it had multiple connotations, and that is, it has the sacred incense. It has the goat energy as well.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
You know, and a lot of this, I think, is also going to these pre-modern stuff too. Like, we see all of this reflection with, you know, like these ancient primitive peoples. Like, the Greeks are always reacting to the people around them, and they're describing all of these piratic cultures, you know, these people who, if you land on their islands, the people will rip you apart. Like, there's the Maenad women in the north. There's the Scythians on the Crimeans. There's the giants, the Cyclopses. Like there's hundreds seemingly of these groups of these weird tribal peoples that practice these cannibal, piratic kind of things. What's going on there?
Neal was just talking about. Neal, tell him about Posidonius with the women on that island.
Yeah, so
what do they do with their babies?
This is a crazy story because all the way somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, he doesn't like specify. I think it's somewhere near France or Britain. Because the reason why I think there's a lot of islands over there, a lot of small islands. We think of like you see the map and you see England and you see Ireland, but you don't see those little tiny islands, and they're big enough to have a little town there, right?
Yeah, like the
there's a lot of those. There's like thousands of those. Right. Anyways, one of those islands, who knows where? It could be it's like picking a needle out of the haystack. One of those islands had a tribe of Amazonian type women who only worship Bacchus, nothing else, only Dionysus. And it was all women. So you're thinking, how the hell is that even possible? How do you have only women living there when there's no men to make more babies? Well, he tells you how they do it. The virgins get sent to the mainland, probably Gaul or something, and they would find a man to get her pregnant. Then she'd go back. And then when they had a child, if it was a boy, they would rip it apart in a ritual Dionysiac, Eva, yake, rip it apart, eat it. And then if it was a woman, they raised it up as their own. That's how you get an all-female matriarchal society.
Wow.
It's intense.
There's so much crazy, like that's
the ancient world is intense, man. The ancient world is like a movie.
Right? Well, we forget, right? Like I also think about like the Cyclops and the Griffins, who are described in perpetual warfare over this some kind of sacred treasure, you know? Like there's all of these weird tribal type groups that are this mysterious, you know? It's really interesting to think about. But going back to Jesus and this piracy, like just watching your video on Dionysus, you know, where it's clearly these piratic rites are associated with the cult of Dionysus and Orpheus, Diana, and Lucifer. But you see, like just listening to your video and everything, like how Jesus is Dionysus, you know?
Oh yeah.
And it's so blatant. Like you could go through the whole Bible and half of the stories are taken from other texts, like the Bacchae, you know, like is Peter just Pentheus, or, you know, like there's a lot of weird parallels, you know?
Myself, and it's not just me, there's a Harvard scholar, Dennis McDonald. He's been shouting out the rooftops. All the classicists are hearing him. It's like he's a classicist now. He just went from being a Bible scholar to a class. He's been telling these Bible scholars, if you say I am the true vine, that is Dionysian. You cannot say that. Everyone in the ancient, if you're walking around the first century and say I am the true vine, that's like saying I am the sky father. That's Jupiter. You don't say that's literally Dionysus. The true vine means the word Bacchus means vine. Like you can't just say that. So Dennis McDonald's basically saying, look, he's trying to dethrone Dionysus as this god's son. Dionysus is known as the best god's son there is, next to Apollo, maybe. Them two are probably equal at it. Or Heracles is kind of important too. But Dionysus and Apollo are God's son. Everyone knows it. They are the princes of heaven. They are the princes. And so Jesus trying to be God's son is trying to be Dionysian.
And even what it is sorry. Go ahead, Ammon.
No, I'm sorry, Snappy. Even more than that, I'll just add, he's this divine son who dies and resurrects.
Exactly.
It
checks all the boxes. Dionysus.
One of the things that I studied in university was the formation of new religious movements through the hybridization of cultural ideas. Okay, you know, you don't ever see new religious movements pop out of nothing. You know, Rastafari is a reaction to Christianity and to the Black Power movement, yet it becomes something distinct and of its own. You know, so it's like this is how new religious movements form. They react to the spiritual cultures in which they exist. And if Dionysus is the most popular deity, or at least one of the most popular deities, why wouldn't the Christians invert this? And as Ammon always points out in his videos, understanding Homer is what it means to be educated at this time. To have Homer memorized, it's like what we see with the Quran in the modern world among Muslims. People are reciting this daily, and they're using it for all sorts of things. Like you'll see carpenters who will use Homer and parts of Homer to help them remember things about their work. And this is a normal thing. Like the myths take on, because they're so memorized and they're so recited. They take on this important cultural role of mimesis and of memorizing things.
Homer's like the ancient form of the internet. If you had access to a Homer scroll or papyri or some sort of like skin that had the text on it, that's like having the internet back then, because Homer has so much information about geography, about rites, about different gods. It's all packed in there. It's all the information in the ancient world. So you can find it in Homer. He tells you about the Pelasgians. He tells you about the Minoans. It's all in Homer. Like Homer, the way he wrote was such a genius way. It's this poetic way of talking about things that are actually going on, and weaving it into a story, into a coherent, a brilliant story. It's amazing.
It's important that we understand how these ancients, though, are utilizing these texts. These texts are so central to their entire understanding of everything around them, right? Like, we still do this to our modern day. Stories are essential to how we perceive the world. Well, this was the story. This was it, And we can see like all of these different communities are looking at Homer and are reinterpreting it through their own lens to use it in a variety of different ways. It becomes work songs. It becomes encoding of math, encoding of so much knowledge. It's not just a religious text. It's how they transferred culture and history,
There's even medicine and magic that come from Homer, and the magic books that we have, or papyri that we have, use Homer for the performance of the sortes. So their oracular science will use actual verses from Homer. That shows you how central. What you're saying is exactly right, Snappy.
And it's not just the Greeks we see this with. All cultures of this time period have these kinds of centralized myths that they're utilizing in this different way, right? Like there's their literal meaning, there's the metaphoric meaning, then there's the extended metaphoric meaning that has to do with these secret societies and different groups. And all of these different groups are using this text because everyone memorizes it. And we're not writing things down as easily, So
yeah. Makes sense.
And you have to protect those cult activities through those language codes that they have. And that's a whole big branch of kind of ancient esoteric knowledge. Is what are the codes that are involved? What are the seals that they're putting on stuff? And what do they mean when they say they're sealing a scroll, right?
Well,
okay.
That just immediately comes to mind is one of my favorite Orphic Vox phrases that we see in the Bible, which is the ears to hear.
Yeah.
Like anyone who understands classics is going to immediately recognize that as an Orphic phrase. Why is that coming out of the mouth of Jesus?
Yeah. Or those golden leaf tablets they found, those Orphic texts. It says, with those who have ears to hear, come enter. With those who don't, get out.
Right.
It's not even similar. It's the same thing. They're saying the same exact thing.
Jesus is saying the same thing at the beginning of Mark. He's doing, I'm saying these things so that some of you will hear. And it's not for everyone, right? Yeah. Jesus is openly using code. I've always wondered why people don't give anything about this, why they don't care about this. Right. Jesus is a guy with children apostles who constantly talks in code about cult activity that involves drug use and child prostitution. And he's looking over his shoulder. Did you ever notice how Jesus is looking over his shoulder every 5 minutes and going, they're on to me. They're on to me. Did you ever notice in his ministry, as soon as he gets his ministry started, he's going from one place to another, running from groups who want to kill him or want to worship him, one of the two.
the last guy who was in his position got his head cut off. Remember, right? John the Baptist. And he also had these same kind of sexual accusations made against him. It's not coming out of nowhere.
And John the Baptist infers in nature the Dionysic John the Baptist.
What's that?
No, I was just looking at a passage on him today with a student. We're reading Mark together just because it's super easy, and he's talking about John and his special place. And what is hilarious is he uses the term. People think it's Jesus was baptized by John. They had the whole meeting. He's baptized. When he comes out of the water, he sees heaven, Uranos, open, and the Spirit descend like a dove, and that process compels him into the eremon, into the wilderness. And what's funny is Mark himself, the author, whoever the author is of this, right? If he's Mark or not, I don't care.
Yeah, I don't care either.
But whoever wrote it distinguished that expression into the wilderness from an actual desert where Jesus traveled. He distinguishes it with a demonstrative. He uses the word, the noun topos. He says this time he goes to a topos, an actual place that is an eremon. Jesus is in this psychological eremon, talking to the devil about what? Casting out demons. And as soon as he's done with it and started his ministry, people are coming to him saying, look, he's eating with the hamartaloi, right? He's eating with the pimps who were involved in harvesting tax, right? When people say, oh, Matthew was a tax gatherer, right? He's a tax collector, right? A telones, right? What do you think that was? You think he worked for the state? No, he worked for businesses, namely the prostitution business that's being run by the hamartaloi, right? Or for the hamartaloi. And those people have to be taxed, right? It's a whole, when you purchase an underage prostitute from Jesus's den in Antiquity, you got to pay a tax on it, right? Right. Just the way it is. When they say tax collector, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about people who take a percentage of goods and services. Yeah, and people don't realize that it's mainstream piracy, people.
Well, there is one exception. When you go to Tarsus, the birthplace of Paul, it's a tax-free port, and you could sell young boys and children there for tax-free. I mean.
So wait a minute. So you get a break, right? You get a break there, right? But in Judea at the time when Jesus walks by the table and he says, Matthew's there, and he's like, get over here, Levi, they call him in one. Get over here. You realize that guy is a tax collector in this industry. And when he recognizes the authority of Jesus and follows him, and that doesn't mean follow. People think it's, oh, I've been saved and I'm going to follow Jesus. No, it doesn't. It means he's still a tax collector, but he's working with Jesus. It's akolutho in Greek. He's working as a slave for Jesus, who's big pimp daddy with his boys. Yeah.
It seems to make sense.
By the way, John the Baptist, everyone wants to assume that he's being drawn from Elijah, and that's fine because, they call him the new Elijah in the text, and they even Elijah also is the guy in the wilderness, blah, 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 blah. But then there's the baptism aspect and him wearing the animal skins and doing baptisms in the desert or in the wilderness. That is almost exactly what we see with these Baptist cults all over Greece. These worshippers of Dionysus and Cotys, they call themselves Baptists, and they wear animal skins. So there's two elements there with John. And by the way, Elijah might even be earlier than that, doing that same drawing from those Baptists. So that might be why he's so much like Elijah and the Baptist. Let's not forget that Elijah is the later. Elijah's not written up. There's no text about Elijah from 600. That's like 400, 300 BC. That's it. That's not Elijah's not that old.
Oh, wait. Can I burst? I'm sorry. I'll shut up after this, but this is so apropos. In the beginning of Mark, the first thing he opens up with is a quote, and he quotes Isaiah.
The Septuagint.
He quotes Isaiah directly, word for word, from the Septuagint.
Right.
Now, if you believe the Judeo-Christian myth, what you think is that Mark, the writer of the gospel, is quoting, because his native language is either Aramaic or Hebrew. They argue back and forth what they think. It wasn't. It was Greek.
It was Greek.
But here's what they think. He was speaking Aramaic. He's quoting Greek from a Hebrew text.
Right. It's not true.
But when he quotes the Hebrew text and writes it in Greek, he writes it exactly like the Septuagint.
Yes, let me one up you real quick. Every time in the New Testament, whether it's in any gospel or in an epistle or in Revelation, wherever, anytime there's a quote from the Tanakh or from the prophets, 100% it's from the Septuagint. Never do they ever call off the Septuagint.
I just wanted to point out too that this image of Elijah, this idea of the wild man in the woods who's gone off to go live a life of kind of like monasticism in pursuit of divinity. This is a trope we see all over the place, right? You have all of the wild men of Europe. You have Shiva and the various even earlier proto-Shivas that we see in Harappa. You know, so to me, like when I see like wild man in the wilderness doing sex rites and drugs, like that, yeah, that's what John is. And also we know like in that area, is and some scholars have pointed out that Mary Salome is connected to this, is the cult of Heracles, but specifically it's the what's that version, Dion? We did a video on this a while back. It was it's not just Heracles, but
Melqart
Heracles.
And by the way, Melqart, well, when I was talking about the palm tree myth that's in the Quran and at Delos with Leto and also with Mary in the Bible, Melqart, remember, he finds that island out there with the olive tree that's moving around, and that's what it deals with the purple, the olive tree and the island of Melqart. That's a whole other aspect of that magic tree.
You know, the phoenix in Greek, the phoenix is a way of referring to a palm tree. I don't know if that's related or not, to be honest.
But I think it also has to do with this image of the winnowing fan too that we see in Odysseus, and also like of the sail. What's going on with this? Because there's the cross of the sail that Odysseus is hung on, and then when he sees Tiresias, he sees the same image, but Tiresias tells him it's not a cross, it's a winnowing fan, that he has to go inland to find this cross, and that's the cross marks where the drugs are. And then he finds the fan crossed in the ground, you know? So there's some weird stuff going on with this image of the cross that well predates Christ.
He's a total wizard, too. People don't realize that Odysseus is a total wizard. The first time we see him, he's out looking for the bow poison, the arrow poison, because that's the thing. People don't realize that when we're saying the purple, we're talking about a compound that is using this DMT-containing purple dye that is used in the trade. But the burning purple is a version of that contains these arrow poisons that Odysseus is looking for from the very beginning. And the dude Odysseus goes to says, no way, man, this stuff is way too potent for you, right? This is Odysseus that he's talking to. When Jason comes to Medea on that first ship, when he gets there to do his pirate thing and abduct her, it says specifically that he has a knowledge of drugs that, although is not as good as Medea's, is good compared to the rest of the world. Those Thessalians, he's a Thessalian. Those people were, Pelasgian offspring, and they were supposed to have a knowledge of the drugs, right? Everybody says all the witches come from Thessaly. Right, the phrase in Antiquity, a Thessalian woman was the way they said a Thessalian witch.
And that's like the flyover country between Macedonia and Athens.
So,
and there's also this weird stuff. Like I've even seen coins with Odysseus like this, his arms stretched across the masts on his boat in a crucifixion pose. Like there, you know, like to think that like all of the Christian imagery is coming from earlier sources. You know, they're just inverting. I'm not saying that Christianity is not an original idea, but I'm saying that like all cultural ideas, it comes out of the cultural framework in which it exists and plays with the images that are at its disposal, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that was brilliant, Dion, what you said with the triclinium and kind of looking at the dining and the feasting, because it does become a sticking issue of scandal in the Gospel of Mark. They are asking him, why are you reclining? Why are you laying down with all of these prostitutes? And, you know, you've got your pimp there, you got your tax pimp there. And, you know, what's going on? And it's not just Matthew he's hanging around with, by the way. It says telones, it's plural, right? He's got numerous people from, you know, within the culture of the child trade, or what we're calling pirates. Yeah, they could, you know, I just don't understand. Tell me why it is, with everything that you just laid out, Dion, why is it that we can't see what Jesus was actually doing? I mean, you know, where is it programming? Is it just years and years and years of a false narrative? What?
Yep. And that works with every religion, because that's why people would do jihad in Islamic countries, because they believe in virgins and going to a magical place. The story is so thick. That's why it has to start with children. That's why this is a children's story we're telling. You know, it's about indoctrinating when you're a child, so you can believe that. That's why the numbers are declining in a lot of religions, because people don't believe it as adults. You have to be indoctrinated as a child to believe it.
That's a big point. That's a really big point.
You know, so I think that's a big part of it, you know. And the other part of it, why you can't see all this stuff, is because the word love, because there's an aspect of love in the story, and we all want and believe in some type of love that we want to share and can heal. So we think, well, I don't want to really know about that stuff. There's the love. And so you put the blinders on.
And then it's also this one thing we see with a lot of these religions that survive the test of time are these stories of persecution. Okay, these shared stories of a persecuted idea. You know, when you really go after someone and you try to destroy something that they believe in, they almost always double down on it. And people love those kinds of stories of oppression, of overcoming.
You become a martyr.
martyrdom. You notice, like, you know, it blows my mind that the Christians in America, who are the vast majority in control of everything, still paint themselves always as the eternal victim. Always. Everyone is out to get them. Everyone's legislating against them, which couldn't be further from the truth, you know? But it suits that narrative. It allows them to maintain their vision of reality. It's all about these stories, you know, stories of control. And you've talked about this a lot on your channel, Neal. It goes back a lot to Plato and this idea of this noble lie, right? Taking the people who are ignorant, who can't understand things, and just telling them a good story so that you can keep them under your thumb, you know?
Yeah. And
I don't blame Plato exactly, but he sparks this idea, you know?
I do. I think he's the reason why we have a Judeo-Christian world, because he says it right in his own text in book 3. He obviously uses Socrates to do it, but that's not Socrates saying. Socrates is not a dogmatist. He doesn't care about nothing. He just cares about engaging in reasonable discussions and having two opposite sides duke it out. He loves that. He loves that debate. But Plato is saying that Homer needs to be replaced with a better myth that children can grow up in, that will shape them into better people, that are and they'll they'll be subservient to their higher philosopher king, and all the stuff that he's saying is like lines up with what Judeo-Christianity wants. You want the Pope on top. You have his bishops underneath. They're controlling the noble lies, and then underneath that is a bunch of indoctrinated children doing as they're told and being told that if you're a good boy, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. Homer is nothing like that. Homer
is the Pope not a philosopher king, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's the philosopher king, and then you see how he's objectively wrong. Now that we've had enough time to see which world was better, the world of Homer and the world of Plato, we know that he was wrong. Whatever Homer did to shape the world with these myths, and people and Nietzsche talks about this too. It's the Dionysian aspect, the tragedy, because life is not just all good and peaches and cream and everything's good. You're going to live this one life and go to heaven, and that's the end of it. No, life is tragic. There's darkness and light. There's two sides of this thing, and to not have one side of that is detrimental to a society. And
exactly, right? And the Christians, they do this in more than one ways. They remove the feminine. They remove the black. Everything is all peace, love, and forgiveness. That's not reality. That's not reality. And the ancients were totally invested, right? They believe in the myth of eternal life. There is no eternal life. Everything must die and be reborn and reassembled. To live is to die. These are two mirrored images in the pagan world, right? Everything is seen in these mirrored images. Yeah. And like the Christians have and through Plato totally subverted that. But what I see in the philosophical world is we have first, you got Heraclitus, and Heraclitus causes the original doubt. He is able to prove that only change is real. And after this, everyone freaks out. This leads to Socrates, who takes it a step further, and he applies that to dialogue, where he presses uncertainty. He challenges everyone who says they know truth or certainty. That's his main point, is to point out that only change is certain. And as soon as you extend things into time, anything that you profess is certain falls apart. You know, because if you go back too far or you think too far ahead, it doesn't apply anymore. You know, but the problem is then Plato is building off of this. What do we do now that our foundation has been racked, that truth has been proven to be an impossibility? You know, we can't understand the totality.
They call it the incomprehensibility.
Exactly. What do we do with that? And Plato's solution is, well, only some of us can understand and can deal with the tragedy of incomprehensibility.
Right.
And we need to lie to people. Whereas Homer,
everyone else. Yeah, exactly.
We need to embrace the tragedy of life. We need to embrace the uncertainty. We need to be challenged by this and accept our limitations. That's the pagan world, you know, accept them and try to overcome them through the extension of ourselves, right? Whereas the Christians want to stick their head in the sand. Anyway, sort of.
Well, no, you made a really good point there, because in the pagan sense, and I'm only using pagan as I'm looking at how the Christians would call them. They're all different. We're all pagans. No, there's Dionysian cults. There's Aphrodite. Like there's different temples everywhere. They're just people free living, by the way. So whatever. I'm going to call them pagan for now. In the pagan sense, you're a part of nature. You're in it. You're one of these cogs of nature that are part of this grand thing. But in Christianity sense, you literally take yourself out of that, and you become above it. You become
there's a separation,
a separate thing from everything else. World is evil, you're divine. World is evil, you're saved. And that just sets up a really disastrous setting to live in.
The fundamental end goal of Christianity is the establishment of a total hierarchy that exists unchanging through all time. Who benefits from a total unchanging hierarchy? Only those on the top. The rest of us are perpetually on the bottom, you know, and then they have all these creepy myths like only 100 and some thousand get to rule over the rest of us and lord it over. But that's really what they want. And you see this throughout all of the Abrahamic religions, to stop the cycles, to stop death. Like they're totally devoid of nature. It's a war against nature, right?
When I first read the Greek Alexander, real quick, when I first read the Greek Alexander romance, and they talk about how I don't know. Actually, I think it was Arian, not the Greek Alexander romance. That Arian, when he wrote about Alexander, it is Arian. Never mind. When Arian said that Alexander stomped out every single fire temple, Zoroastrian fire temple that he came across on his travels, and wanted to extinguish that religion, my first response was, "Wow, that's kind of rough. Like, why was he?" But now I sort of I'm like, I'm not saying I would do that, but like in a weird way, I'm like, I see why he was doing that. He saw this monotheistic religion as something that's just going to be terrible for everything, and he wanted to end it. And he was pretty rough about it, to be honest. But I'm just saying, like, I kind of get what he was doing.
If you can put somebody through a series of initiatory events that include drugs, exercise, physical things happening to your body, and you can allow them to see death and then bring them back to life. If you can take them beyond what is death, you can raise them to a level that they can never be a monotheist, right? It's the whole idea of the mystery religions, is that you are born into a new understanding that you have, right? You finally know yourself. And like Cicero can say, yeah, everybody's got to do this once. If you think about it, the oracular mysteries were established to prevent this kind of corruption, this monadic corruption of the system, which does somehow degenerate into the individual and the individual's entitlement. And where you go from there is the loss of civilization. It's kind of weird to think about Christianity as being the focus of entitlement. But if you are the one who follows the one God, who has the one power, and you're going to the one heaven, there's nothing more entitled than that.
Yes,
and you
it's
can
powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, you can persecute anybody else you want. Doesn't matter if they're gender switchers. Doesn't matter if they're from the north or from the south. It doesn't matter. You can persecute anyone.
Manifest destiny, they call it. It's there. We're the chosen saved ones under Christ, and we're gonna go into this new land, and we're just gonna take it, all their resources, and they can either get baptized or die. And they really felt that was the way. They really thought that. And like, you're demonic and wicked and evil, hellbound if you're not one of us. You like to wrap your head around how atrocious that is for a society to think like that. It's mind-blowing.
Think about it this way. We're just talking about Socrates. This is one of the most celebrated figures in all of Greco-Roman history, okay? He is well known as a huge pot smoker, a lazy lout who doesn't work, and also for being possessed by a demon who he talks to on the regular, okay? Yeah. In the Greek and Roman worlds, these facts are celebrated about the man. Celebrated.
Like Diogenes too.
Okay? Right? Diogenes too. Right? In the Christian world, this guy is the absolute evil, right? They take possession, and they saw Socrates as somewhat special. He went through this traumatic war experience, but came out possessed. Everyone wanted a daimon, and now under the Christian rule, being possessed is literally the worst thing that can happen to you. And we have to go out and abuse orphan children to prevent them from turning into oracles. Whoa.
Xenophon said that Socrates would just be in the corner looking up at the wall, just talking like a normal conversation. Like he had a daemon, and it was for real. Like he was seeing something.
And this is the smartest man who ever lived. This is the ideal person that we're all supposed to strive after.
The scientific method is based off Socratic method.
The pot-smoking guy who sat around in the marketplace telling everyone they didn't know shit. Okay? That's Socrates, whose wife is constantly like, we're on the verge of bankruptcy. Can't you get a job? Can't you get some of these young students, give you some of their money? They all say that you're so great. Why isn't that turning into money for us?
And he ends up getting in trouble for corrupting those youth, and introducing new gods. But despite that, the oracle, which is their pinnacle, the Bronze Age pinnacle, the oracles ultimately produced the museum. And everything that we have that comes from the university from that. These oracles were wise enough, right, to be able to say, hey, this guy who says he doesn't know, he's the smartest one of you idiots. Yeah. Those women that ruled that we don't even appreciate are feminist scholars tell us they never existed. Don't pay attention to this feminine power. We're all oppressed. All that stupid 60s ideology that bled into the scholarship and bled into the everything from biblical scholarship to classics. And I tell you what, if I hear one more paper about the oppression of women, I'm going to say, do you recognize that Odysseus is 1, 2, 3? How many women's slave is he? How many women? He's crying in the first scene. He's on the beach crying because, please let me go. You turned all my men into slaves, right? You drugged them all and turned them into slaves. Please help us. And she's like, no, baby. Right? You got to come to me first, right? And she gets out of him what she wants and then ultimately releases him.
Right.
Right. But wait a minute. Women had no power in antiquity, right? No. Don't believe the academics. They're pulling a reputation and a product. That's it.
Or look at Olympias having power over her own captors. When they tried to capture her after the Civil War broke out, she had power. Like, there's women that had insane amounts of power in the ancient world.
This has always been a trope where we underestimate, here's the thing, is that there's a lot of people who are trafficked and treated like property in the ancient world. And there's a lot of extreme oppression and violence. We're not saying that, but that doesn't mean that women aren't able to rise, especially smart and powerful women aren't able to rise to positions of authority and power, right? Like the Oracle at Delphi, right? This is the most important person in the Mediterranean world for how long? Like 6,000 years? Like what, and you're going to tell me that this is just some illiterate teenager. What about all the women behind her? Who's running the temple?
No, you're right.
Who's teaching all of the writing of the languages, right? Like we hear all of this stuff. Like you have to read between the lines,
Well, I'm once again, I'm going to bring up the word Tarsus, where Paul's from, and the pirates. Yeah. That's where Cleopatra pulled up in a boat. Yeah. And Mark Antony had to go out there on the boat and talk to her. And they call that today there in Turkey the Cleopatra Gates. They say that's where she pulled up, and
she had control over that whole entire region of the world. And that's where Mark Antony really rose up and he called himself an emperor. He called himself Imperator Mark Antony. He was really, technically, he kind of was the first real emperor of the Roman Empire. Because if he would have won the war against Octavian, he really would have been the big. But like he styled himself as the Imperator, and then all those lands in the east, Turkey, Judea, Syria, Egypt, that was all Cleopatra's. They called them the donations of Cleopatra, and she set up her sons, the children she had with Mark Antony, as kings and queens over all those lands. That's how it was. They set up an empire over there.
Oh yeah, and it started when he stepped on the boat.
Yep.
And it's also
they have a famous painting about that too, where they show Mark Antony walking over to the boat. Cleopatra in this amazing, glorious boat with like purple robes and golden stuff. It was you're right. That was that's like a Caesar crossing the Rubicon scene right there. That's a historical event.
I always think too, like if we look at Babylon and we look at a lot of the writings about Babylon, like in the Syrian Goddess with Lucian, he's talking about Semiramis building these massive walls and being this extraordinarily powerful queen, ruling through her children, having thousands of eunuchs, making statues of herself depicted as Venus, as Astarte, And then also they talk about all of these powerful women who are basically like, it really reminds me of some of these women you see today who are powerful through OnlyFans and whatnot. But they talk about these women who have all these men giving them gifts just because they're beautiful. And they have independent households and they're not married. They just have hundreds of suitors.
Look at the Sibylists. These women are writing texts that become foundational Christian text. And there's Sibyls all over the Roman Empire. Even outside of the Roman Empire, you have Sibyls.
Makes me wonder too about what the power dynamic was that you could get. I mean, think about that island that Posidonius writes about, that Neal was talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so they come to the mainland, and we know They may be connected to the Amazonians, or at least to the tribes that are around the Black Sea. So they're going to have the same customs, which means their women are killers, right? When you only have women in your society, your military has to be women. And, you know, they have rules about how many men you got to kill before you can have a child. It makes me wonder, in these civilizations, if I'm a dude walking around in antiquity, and here come the raiders, right? Here come the raiding women from the island, right? Okay, so they're gonna eat your baby if it's masculine. Okay, it's their custom, right? Which you gotta think, why would you? You know, we flew by that one a little too fast. Why would you be eating? Right? You guys all hear the Bacchic procession here. These Maenads are tearing apart Pentheus, right? They're tearing apart their own children. And people say, well, they couldn't have done this. It's terrible. And the Greeks are like, well, we don't do that anymore. But what about these women? If I'm a dude walking around antiquity and I see these women, if I'm not associated with some kind of town or guard or something, I'm liable to get killed by them or raped by them and then killed maybe. But how do we as moderns look back on that society and have the guts to say the ancient world was a place where women were not respected and they were forced to stay at home? You shut up. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Just to give some of these feminists a slight pass, we have to remember we're on the other side of the greatest genocide in human history that was conducted by the Christians, where they removed women from society and instituted these patriarchal frameworks which dominate cultures everywhere today. And we have to talk, like, I was just reading a book about the witch trials, and the persecution of witches directly led to the Black Plague, because they killed all the cats and they killed all the practitioners of medicine. That's what happened. You know, there's a direct correlation to these kinds of violence. There was such an incredible loss.
Why do you think that when somebody's being unfairly attacked by someone, they call it a witch? It's a witch hunt. They're after me. It's a witch hunt. The reason why is because that's what they were doing. They were singling out regular pagan women that were not doing anything wrong, calling them witches, putting them on trial, killing them. Witch hunt.
You know, and it's like, the problem is that it's, you know, there had to be this feminist movement that had to set a lot of the records straight and to explore a lot of this stuff, but it's become, you know, corrupted in and of its own self. You know, it's starting to be too much about an ideology and less about trying to uncover the actual truth, you know, but it is a necessary reaction to extreme violence and oppression. And these ideas are still needed today and are continuing to evolve and adapt and get better. You know, not every single, you know, like Ammon, you brought up that one scholar there, but her work is actually pretty good in other regards. You know, you know what I mean? Like when it comes to the Roman, she's kind of a mix. I'm trying to remember her name, but she's well known.
Her work on Roman religions is phenomenal.
Exactly.
I was going to go read her work for this episode.
Yeah, no. Well, the reason why I like that text, there's a 2-book source book that's called Roman Religion Source Book, and it's the reason why I love it so much. It's just sources put in one place. I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of her own, speaking on the matters, but like the majority of these, she's just giving you the sources. Very valuable text, but I do see wwhy Ammon has that. There it is. Yeah, that's a good text, dude. It's a great text.
For sure. Like Ammon is right in his criticism when it comes to her presentation of women. It's extraordinarily biased, right? It's only focusing on a lot of the working class women, and it's taking out the problem too. When a lot of these people are talking about Greek society, I always go, when, where, which city, which time period? You're talking about one of the longest lived empires in human flipping history, with dozens of city-states spread across the islands and Anatolia.
I just thought of something too. In that source book, she herself talks about how what the hell is Julia Domna is worshipped as a goddess in her own time. She's even bringing up her own. I don't even think she realized it. She's bringing up examples of women being worshipped like Jesus. Julia Domna. They said that she was Athena incarnate. and she had her own like temple and everything. So like there is an example. Like I don't know, it's in her own text. So I'm just saying.
Right. You know what it is that we don't, and this is true, we don't see a lot of material culture that survives that is written by women from a female perspective, you know? And like there is a lot, like I honestly wonder about things like what's going on with the Maenads. I wish we had firsthand accounts from the Maenads themselves, because so much of this is going to be reactionary men who aren't allowed to participate under death, just making up shit to try and go after women. We see this all the time. So why would it be any different, you know?
You do have the Sibylists that are women. Then you have what's her name from Lesbos?
Sappho.
I mean, there's women in there. I mean, I get what you're saying though. There could be more. It's like sure.
What I mean is just that there's not a lot of firsthand accounts from women who are doing the rites that have survived to us, right? And a lot of the accounts about the women are from men. And it's a lot of like reactionary stuff.
Sure.
You know?
So if I could say one thing real quick was Jesus castrated?
Oh.
Okay.
Getting us back on topic, thanks.
No, but it's the same topic. That's what we're talking about, feminization.
He didn't have any.
We're talking about the goddess and Apostle John, the twins. The goddess is always there. You can't sanitize the goddess. So these men have to take on the goddess role.
So the imagery with John the Beloved is so on the nose. He's got the long hair. He's got the clean shaven face. He has the cup of snakes, and then it's almost certain that he's at least a Galloi. I don't know about Jesus though. Ammon, you've brought up a couple sources, and I know we've talked about this because I had mentioned it to you, and you were like, the sources don't fully confirm. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would like to see the description of him when he was castrated. I would love that. I would love, under what circumstances when he was down in Egypt, he had all that trust fund money that the Magi gave him. They pushed him into the drugs. They gave him both the bases that he needed for all the magic drugs. He's off there in Egypt and he comes back. Notice that he comes back and he doesn't walk into town like, he's Henry Cavill or something, right? He doesn't walk in and take the town. He comes into town and goes to the teaching centers, and there they say, oh my God, this kid is teaching like oh my God, what's happening? And Christians say, oh, well, it's because he's pumped full of the power of God, baby. And the Logos just talks out of him, right? No, I'm sorry, but that's the fairy tale. What's much more likely historically is that he was educated in Egypt. Now, the question is he, if he's getting a priestly education, he may have been a eunuch. How would we know this? If he is using terminology that is central to what eunuchs are going to be encountering and living within. If we're able to pull out those words, and when he uses certain titles, right? Why is he using this title when he's doing something that's a little bit too much like the great mother worship, right? Where he's putting himself in the position of Attis. Is that why he's with that kid in the end? Because the kid is the cup, and people don't realize the child is the cup. Lady Babylon, that thing that word that we use that I never like to use, whore, right? But I'm quoting what she's called. That way of looking at her is the same eyes that are looking at the Paidiske, that child prostitute girl that comes up to Peter and says, hey, you're one of his boys, right? It's the same spirit, that Paidiske. You see it bleeding through. So when Jesus is with his boy, is there any way to tell whether or not he's castrated? And that's why I say, Snappy,
You're right. There is a lot of parallels, but you're right. I haven't seen direct evidence. I keep thinking of, like we talked about this, Dion, on Occult Explorers, is what's that Jewish figure who goes through the oracular mysteries and is castrated? What's that text? I'm having trouble remembering.
Isn't that Daniel?
Daniel,
yeah.
And Ashpenaz.
Right? Jesus is
Which
doing
means
what
the
Daniel
horse's
does.
nose,
by going
which
to
means
Egypt.
horse's nose.
Yeah.
What's right about the nose? I missed that. Sorry.
Horse's nose is what Ashpenaz means. That's
Right.
the eunuch, the priest. He's the prince of the eunuchs that helps convert him through a diet. It's a special diet he has to undergo. And he says, I don't want to do the diet. He don't want to drink the cup. They never want to drink the cup.
By the way, Celsus points out that he's from his sources, and he said I forgot what he says, but he says he cites like Jewish historians living in the time of Jesus, saying that he did move to Egypt and then came back educated wanted to prove himself as among the educated. He even says that. Celsus. Like, why would Celsus just make that up? You know what I mean? And by the way, Celsus is not a late text. That's an early 150. That's early. To me, I'm taking that serious. I'm looking at that because he does not. It's always good to have a hostile source to get the truth. You don't want to just read the Christian church fathers to hear what they want to say. Let's see what the hostile sources say. Celsus is early. Celsus is, and here's the thing about Celsus. He knows a lot about Christianity. Why do I know that? Because he starts naming off all their different names of the sects of Christians that exist. He knows more about Christians than Paul does. Paul is not naming off different sects of Christianity. He's just going on some like trip that he's having. Like, he's just talking about all the bullshit. But Celsus is like picking this thing apart and saying, here's the group of Simonians. These are the Sibylists. Those are the Marcionites. He knows all about them. So I'm taking what he says serious when he says stuff. His father was probably a Roman soldier named Pantera, and he moved to Egypt and got educated.
You're talking about Paulus, a.k.a. Saul. Now, imagine when Saul pulls up and he prophesies. That's why the method they were using, kidnapping boys to go sell them at the ports for double, that's a tough sell. But if I can prophesize and get you to join something for a magical experience, take you on the boat and then sell you, and then just come back and get a whole new crew. Because like you said, the slaves in Judea were worth twice as much if you get them up to Tyre and you get them up to closer to Turkey than if you get them to Rome, they're worth triple.
Depends.
And you get them to the tax-free port.
Depends on how good looking they are too, right? Because and people don't understand this because you've never been in a slave market, right? But there is a difference in quality between humans. You can put a price on it, and they know a virgin, and this is what this is why the Thracians were dealing in the virgins. The highest price thing you're going to get is a virgin boy or girl who is just reaching their ripening, their complete ripeness for adulthood. That's the way they looked at it. It's for us, it's still in your minority, right? But for them, as soon as you were entering that pubertal capacity, then you were ripe for the picking, and they knew those fetch the highest price in market, right?
Well,
those and the rich ones.
A functional eunuch that has undergone the surgery, the castration, and they didn't die, and now they can't get the missus pregnant, the mistress of the house, and they can function in a feminine and a masculine capacity.
And here's the thing too: if you get the child young enough and you do the castration young enough, what ends up happening is they don't fully develop. They stay youthful. They maintain that falsetto voice. They wind up they're and if they do it where they're just like they did in the Greco-Roman style where it's just the testes, they're able to have sex. They can be sex slaves. So often these eunuchs were used as sex slaves by high-powered women and men,
Castarati.
That's the whole story of Circe, right? It's the whole story. She has a whole room full of drugged men that she has sex with, right? Isn't that cool? I mean, cool in a way, like, I don't know, maybe you want to go there. I mean, things could be worse, right?
They say that people pilgrimaged to Colchis to get the bath of Medea. It was like she invented baptism. Basically, she had this like real first time they would learn how to like heat up water and use it as a ritual bath. They credit Medea. Herodotus says Medea invented that.
She is so full of drugs. She is so full of drugs that you can give her a liquid bath, right, with water, and that offscoring that they wash off of her is considered a medicine.
Whoa.
It's considered a medicine. You can take it and it will do things to you. I mean, that you understand, the person is the cup. In this Bronze Age religion, the person is producing those chemicals that are causing you to be able to enter into communion, right? That's why you have it. That's why it has to be connected with porneia in Revelation. It's a cup of sexual juices, right? How are you going to produce sexual juices unless you're having intercourse, right? And they talk about the model in the Middle Ages, and Michelet writes about this one, is the priestess over the tripod. And she is actually producing that communion into the tripod, which is then administered to the group. But we know that her phallus that she's using, and everybody's shocked. Don't be shocked. The basket that is the most sacred aspect, the Ark of the Covenant of Bacchic worship, contains a poisonous serpent and a dildo.
Whoa.
Yeah, you guys, Neal, am I wrong? Am I wrong about the basket having the dildo and the serpent in it?
No.
And you know what? It parallels what we see in the Indian stuff with Shiva Shakti.
Yeah.
Shiva is always the phallus, the stone pillar or the primordial pillar of fire, and then the goddess Shakti is always the serpent that coils the pillar, you know, or forms the base of the pillar as a lotus flower. But it's either a flower or a snake.
It's a lot like the concept of Venus or Aphrodite and Bacchus entwined. They call it the Lucifer entwined. And they give birth to Priapus, who is a phallus, who is a giant dick. So, like, you see, what's going on with that? It's just a lot of,
you know, that's worth a like and subscribe right there.
Yeah.
If anything, and a comment and a share.
That Orphic hymn about Protagonist, the firstborn. It calls him Phanes and Priapus. What the hell's going on here? So there's a lot of weird cultic stuff.
There's a lot to it too, because there's also that Metis, right? There's the Phanes that's masculine presenting, and then there's Metis, which is the female presenting. But they're both these bigendered, animalistic, amalgams.
Yeah, someone on Twitter was like, some idiot on Twitter was writing about how in the ancient world they never did any of this modern stuff with trans and this, and I just started throwing sources at them. Here's Pliny the Elder talking about transforming men to women and women to men, and they're not disgusted by it. They think this is this is breaking. This is amazing science. They talk about it like they're not like that mentality is modern, not the actual idea of it. The mentality that's so against it is modern.
You know what? We like to view things through our lens. As Ammon has pointed out numerous times, the Greeks have a very nuanced conception of gender. There's not just even 3 genders. There's many genders. There's masculine presenting women. There's feminine presenting men. Right. You know, there's a lot of nuance here, right? And they're celebrating all of this very diversity. You know, intersex people and hermaphrodites are a blessing from God.
Hermaphroditus was a goddess.
Right?
Like a very
exactly.
You know what I mean?
And it's the combination of the two of the most powerful deities, Hermes and Aphrodite, right? Love and communication.
I was talking about someone about this. That the idea of having gods that represent different aspects of phenomena in natural history or natural in the natural world, to having a god that represents anybody. Like you have, like whoever you are, whatever you're like, whatever you identify as, there's a god for you that gives you representation in the world. It makes you feel better about yourself. It gives you more power. Whereas when there's just one god and it's a man with a beard, and that only helps one type of person. Like think about the patriarchal society. Only one person benefits from that. You know what I mean? Like
you sound like Socrates. You sound like Socrates, Neal, right? Everybody has a personal daemon. Exactly. You know, I mean, think about that concept for a minute, how revolutionary and how big that is, that you have access to a supernatural force that is in particular sync with you. This is not an angel assigned to your well-being, tote, right? This is a daimon whose very existence is like an invisible counterbalance to yours in this dimension.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
Iamblichus
Crazy
talks
good.
about this a lot, where it gets into this whole thing like, this is the version of you outside of time that has completed all of the cycles and returned back to the cosmic womb, that has gone back to the one. And it's here to show you what you need to learn to go through the cycles of life and death and to guide you. So it's like a personal you that's already the supreme. It's, you know, it's such a wild concept. And you see this reflected in many occult traditions because it's so central, you know?
Absolutely.
I think it's just physics. I think it just comes down to quantum physics and however the universe is that we can't see, but what is behind that black hole and all the balance of the dark matter and everything, and how the universe works time-wise and gravity-wise. I don't think you think about classical magic and you think Disney and cartoons and, you know, miraculous things. You don't think medicine, and you don't think gender, and you don't think people using drugs to enter into a state of communion with the divine, right? We don't think in those terms anymore, unless, I don't know, Dion, some of us think in those terms.
Just saying, why not?
No, it's wild, right? Because like you said, you know, like we have this cartoon vision. So much of magic now has become about greed, right? It's a, you know, all these people who are, you know, it's the secret. It's
like you see this. I see this all the time online. People saying, "I know a magic formula that'll get your ex to come back to you." Like,
right? And then it's like the other day,
everyone's just focused on that one thing. Like, come on.
And meanwhile, ancient magic is a lot like psychology 90% of the time. I'm reading about what they're doing at the Temple of Asclepius, and they're like, okay, come here, tell us your problems, you know, literally write it out as poetry, go to sleep with these snakes, then tell us about your dreams as well. And we're going to have a sit-down conversation about your feelings and the art that you've just made. How's it like that's psychology? It's art therapy.
Carl Jung said that ancient magic is modern psychology.
Pretty much, right? All of the magic that we see with, especially the cult, at least of Dionysus, and Nietzsche talks about this, who you referenced earlier, is all about affirmation of life. It's about reaffirming this process and re-putting yourself onto this path to accept the pain and the suffering that you have to go through. Because life is difficult and it is painful, but you're stuck here, you know? And there's two things that we can do. You can stick your head in the sand and pretend and make up a story like the Christians do, or you can try at least to try and figure out what are you afraid of? Let's talk about it, you know? Try and face it. The big difference to me is like the holy mystery is all about experiencing Pan, the all in the Greek side. That is the goal. Who is Satan on the Christian side? Pan, you know, right? The all. One is all about acceptance. One is all rejection. You know,
it becomes everything that is evil. When before it was nature, and that you're a part of that nature.
Yep.
And if you're not separated from it, it's not evil or different. It's you are part of that. Like,
we don't like this uncomfortableness, right? Because Pan also represents the panic, the violence, the filth, the excess. But this is what it is to be alive. You have to deal with those things. All of our societies are defined by how we deal with excess, how we deal with violence, you know, how we try to persist, you know, and it's like, you know, our modern society has disconnected ourselves from this. You know, and we try to pretend that we're above nature rather than a part of it, you know?
Gaia. And, you know, Jordan Peterson always likes to talk about how the postmodern Marxist types, they worship Gaia. Well, yeah, that's Gaia. This is our planet. Why not? Why is that? You just said it like that was some sort of own. That's not an own. Like, what? Of course you have to treat Gaia well. We live on Gaia, you know?
Yeah, that's for sure right there.
But you hear a lot of these like fascists, like and a lot of these extremists who, like, there's a hatred that you see for the modern natural world, right? Like, I was listening to some Elon Musk, and he literally talks about how, no, nature needs to be conquered and made subservient, and we need to conquer the stars, and everything has to be put under our fucking thumb, you know? And it's like hubris, the sheer hubris, you know?
You know what that is? He's a space pirate.
Yep.
There you go.
You know, mateys. Well, we're getting to the 2-hour mark right here.
Yeah, gotta cut it. Sorry.
No, I'm having fun. I'm glad that we joined up. You know,
that was quick
to explore these Saturnian mysteries right here, huh? People wonder what the satanic initiation stuff's all about.
That's perfect, Dion. You couldn't have ended it better by saying he's a pirate. Yeah, when you think about it, my God, man. It's almost like humanity is a struggle between two different directions. And you can see the monad direction and you can see the free civilization direction. And, you know, they were yelling about, let's not make it stop. Pirate. Elon Musk, you're a pirate.
Space pirate. Arr.
Donald Trump, you're a pirate too. You see these, it's we're fighting against these people who want to create their own narratives and put us as the secondary characters in their story. You know, that's what we're fighting against. The Christians are doing it. These great men are doing it, and we need to rebel against that and return back to a natural, reasoned approach. You know, not believing in fairy tales and bullshit, making up mythologies about people. You know,
they said the wisest
saying to cut the myth.
They said the wisest prophet in antiquity, Tiresias, was wise because he was able to be both male and female. He got turned into a female at a certain time, lived for a certain number of years, and then got turned back into a male. And so he had that perspective of being both. They said he was the one in all mortals who would see once he was in the underworld. He still saw, because the shades don't see, they're blind. Right? But Tiresias sees. Why? Because he's been both male and female. Imagine if it was a virtue. If you say this to an evangelical, it burns their soul, right? It's actually a virtue to understand both feminine and masculine. And the person who does is a step ahead of everyone else.
Makes sense.
Amazing. On that note, guys, like Dion had said earlier, like and subscribe. Please make sure you go and check out Neal at Gnostic Informant and Ammon over at Lady Babylon 666. They're both doing amazing work. Neal just did a 2-hour video on Dionysus, talking extensively on a lot of the themes we just referenced here. Ammon has been talking about this stuff since day one. And his last video going over Lucian is some of the most provocative stuff he's ever brought up. So please go check out their content. And any last words, guys? Let's start with Neal.
Well, I just thought that was a great conversation. I didn't know it went by that fast. I thought it was only like 45 minutes in.
Love it.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is just talking to everyone in the chat as well. Yeah, just stay curious. That's all.
Love it. You, Ammon?
Yeah, I say thanks for having me. And I think the presentation that Dion gave was about 20 years ahead of the game. And I think it should be taken very seriously. And what you guys are doing is bringing that material evidence back to people. You're functioning as the museum. So thank you for allowing us, you know, by us, I mean me, because I'm not Neal, but thank you for letting me participate. And Neal's pretty cool too, but I want everybody to notice that my name came first.
And Dion, you got any last words for us?
Oh, well, this adventure started through me watching Gnostic. Then I saw Ammon on there. Ended up at the Discord with y'all. Beautiful people. I'd like to say this message is for evangelical Christians and our Christian brothers that are watching. If you believe in unconditional love, then you shouldn't be upset. This shouldn't matter.
Right.
Shouldn't matter. You already have something special. It shouldn't matter. There should be no negative energy towards us. And if you are a Christian and really want to know about Jesus, then you should be curious. You should be watching this. You want to know like us that searches for this. You know, that's all I got to say. Keep searching.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for spending your time with us. And thank you everyone in the chat for tuning in. You know, this has been the 33rd episode of Occult Explorers. You know, we're so happy to bring you this show. So please keep supporting us. You know, we have links below to support us on Patreon or to support us on Coffee. So thanks again. And always come join the Discord. We have ongoing conversations that continue on the Discord. We're actually doing a movie night tonight where we're going to be watching Salome's Last Dance, which is all about Salome by Oscar Wilde. And as we know, Salome is one of the central figures in this whole Jesus mystery. She's the one who gets John the Baptist decapitated. She's the one who does her magic dance. And also, what's going on with Mary Salome, who we mentioned in this episode? Is that a cult title? Why does she have Salome in her name? She's a rich boat pirate lady with the Sons of Thunder. So come join us on Discord where we watch that movie tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. And thanks again, everyone. Peace, love. Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan.
Good night, everyone.